What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live and in living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, DJLittleRock.com. Let me say that one more time. DJLittleRock.com. Check availability and get a free price quote. And maybe you can have me on the ones and twos, the digital wheels of steel at your next event. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Use the hashtag What Makes You Famous and find it everywhere. Time for a little What Makes You Smarter. Learn with me right here on the program. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Sunday, May 31st, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, protests lead to another night of unrest nationwide. Protest against police brutality following the death of George Floyd continued throughout dozens of cities across the United States on Saturday. The demonstrations were largely peaceful during the day, but several turned violent at night as police and crowds clashed and some protesters set fires and damaged property. In New York, a police car was seen plowing into a crowd of protesters, and one person was killed in Indianapolis when a gunman fired at a protest. Hundreds of people were arrested throughout the day. Mayors in several cities issued curfews, while the National Guard was activated in Washington, D.C., and 10 states, including Minnesota, where Floyd died and the protests originated. By Saturday evening, around 1,000 protesters in Washington had gathered by the White House, which was protected by Secret Service, D.C. Police, and U.S. Parks Police. This is according to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Number 2, global coronavirus infections top 6 million. The number of confirmed coronavirus infections worldwide has topped 6 million per Johns Hopkins University, as several countries continue to ease restrictions amid the pandemic. The United States accounts for more than 1.7 million of those cases. Brazil, which has the second highest number of cases, registered its highest daily increase after tallying 33,000 new infections in the previous 24 hours, as it approaches 500,000 overall. The South American country also surpassed France's death toll, making it the country with the fourth most COVID-19 fatalities after U.S., United Kingdom, and Italy. Globally, there have been 369,627 coronavirus deaths, with more than 100,000 occurring in the U.S. This is according to Johns Hopkins University and The Guardian. Number 3, Trump postpones G7, aims to expand summit. President Trump on Saturday postponed the Group of 7 summit, which he had hoped to host in Washington, D.C. at the end of June, until at least September. Both German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau refused to commit to attending over concerns about the coronavirus pandemic, but Trump didn't indicate their potential absences were the primary reasons for his decision. Instead, Trump said he believes the current group of countries, the U.S., Germany, Canada, Great Britain, France, Japan, and Italy, is, quote, outdated, end quote, and doesn't represent, quote, what's going on in the world, end quote. He said he plans to extend invitations to Australia, South Korea, India, and Russia, which was expelled from what was then the Group of 8 in 2014 over Moscow's annexation of Crimea. Trump reportedly wants to discuss China with those countries at the summit. This is according to CNN and Reuters. Number 4, SpaceX, NASA team up for historic launch. NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are making their 19-hour journey from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to the International Space Station inside SpaceX's Crew Dragon after NASA and SpaceX teamed up for the first launch of a spacecraft carrying humans into space from U.S. soil since 2011. The launch was originally scheduled for Wednesday, but lightning and rain led to its postponement. Weather threatened to derail Saturday's launch as well, but the skies cleared in time. The mission is considered the start of a new era in spaceflight. Not only is it the first launch from U.S. soil in nearly a decade, but it's the first time a private company orchestrated a crewed mission to space. The Crew Dragon is scheduled to dock with the space station at 10:29 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. This is according to NASA and SpaceX. Number 5. Pompeo, Iran's Zarif call each other out for hypocrisy amid U.S. protests. United States and Iranian officials traded barbs over Twitter in response to the police brutality protests that have swept across the U.S. this weekend following the death of George Floyd while in police custody in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeted, quote, "It is long overdue for the entire world to wage war against racism," end quote, even if, quote, "some don't think Black Lives Matter," end quote, while posting a picture of an edited U.S. State Department press release that had been written about protest in Iran in an effort to highlight what he considers U.S. hypocrisy. That prompted a response from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said, quote, "You hang homosexuals, stone women, and exterminate Jews," end quote. This is according to Fox News and Mike Pompeo. Number 6, Los Angeles closes coronavirus testing centers for safety reasons during protests. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti closed the city's coronavirus testing centers Saturday for, quote, "safety," end quote, reasons, as the protests against police brutality sparked by the death of George Floyd sprung up across the nation's second largest cities. Garcetti said it was necessary to close the testing centers to clean up damage and restore order. The city has 36 free coronavirus testing locations, including a new one at Dodger Stadium, giving it the capacity to conduct 20,000 tests per day. Los Angeles continues to report a high number of cases, but the city will begin its second phase of reopening, and Garcetti said Friday that diagnostic centers are now reporting the lowest positive rate since testing began. This is according to the Washington Post and KTLA. Number 7. China factory activity slows. China's manufacturing activity slowed in May thanks to decreased demand, especially from foreign markets, official data showed Sunday. China's factories are up and running again after the country shut down earlier this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. But economists believe it will take some time before the industry and broader economic activity returns to pre-crisis levels. Other sectors, such as services and construction, did see a slight jump in activity from April, but the cultural, sports, and entertainment industries continue to struggle, and many venues remain closed to fear of a second wave of infection. Economists also flag concerns around unemployment. This is according to Agence France Presse and Reuters. Number 8, Saudi Arabia reopens 90,000 mosques. Grand Mosque remains closed. Around 90,000 mosques reopened under strict health guidelines in Saudi Arabia, allowing worshipers for the first time in 2 months because of the coronavirus pandemic. People must keep at least 6 feet apart during prayer, wear face masks at all times, and refrain from greeting one another with handshakes or hugs. The Grand Mosque in Mecca, Islam's holiest site, and home to the Kaaba, remains closed to the public. However, meanwhile, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which the Associated Press notes is Islam's holiest site outside of Saudi Arabia, also reopened for prayer for the first time since mid-March. A large crowd reportedly waited outside its gates Sunday before getting their temperature checked upon entrance. This is according to the Associated Press. Number 9, Israeli Defense Minister apologizes for police shooting of unarmed Palestinian man. Israeli Minister of Defense Benny Gantz, who is also Israel's, quote, alternate, end quote, prime minister in the country's new power-sharing deal, apologized Sunday for the Israeli police's fatal shooting Saturday of 32-year-old Ayad Halak, an unarmed, autistic Palestinian man in Jerusalem. Gantz said, quote, "We are really sorry about the incident," end quote, and, quote, "share in the family's grief," end quote, adding that he's sure, quote, "this subject will be investigated swiftly," end quote. In a statement, Israeli police said they spotted a suspect, quote, with a suspicious object that looked like a pistol, end quote, and fired when Halak failed to obey orders to stop. The victim's family said he was heading to a school for students with special needs where he studied every day. This is according to the Associated Press and Haaretz. Number 10. Goodell criticized for statements on protests. In response to the protest against police brutality that have swept across the United States, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said in a statement Saturday that, quote, there remains an urgent need for action, end quote, following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and that the, quote, NFL family is greatly saddened by the tragic events across our country, end quote. Goodell added that, quote, the protesters' reactions to these incidents reflect the pain, anger, and frustration that so many of us feel, end quote. Goodell's comments weren't particularly well received, however, as people took to social media to point out that the former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, has remained out of the league for years following his nonviolent protest of police brutality during the national anthem. This is according to ESPN and NJ.com. That's 10 things you need to know today for Sunday, May 31st, 2020. Thank you for listening. I hope everyone's doing reasonably well in this particularly trying time. Drop some comments. Let me know what you're up to these days. I know I usually don't editorialize, but the news today is just particularly grim. This has been What Makes You Smarter. If you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here. Peace. I'm out of here. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at SmarterWhat, and YouTube, username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/KeysDan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening.